Well, thank you all, and good evening, distinguished guests, visitors, members of the Alamo chapter of the Military Order of the Purple Heart. It's indeed an honor and privilege to be here with you tonight, and I thank you for the invitation to come and speak to you. I also thank your organization and its members for the great things you all do, supporting our country, its wounded warriors, and our veterans. The Military Order of the Purple Heart is a great organization dedicated to national service, patriotism, and to honoring and supporting those individuals who so bravely serve our nation, and you've truly given of your body and blood in our nation's defense. Your chapter is the largest in the United States, distinguishes itself for the support it provides to our wounded warriors and our veterans here in San Antonio and on the 3 major military bases here. This is President's Day weekend, and as we honor our past presidents, specifically President George Washington, who established the Purple Heart Award in 1782 during the Revolutionary War. And I would like to tell you just a little bit about the evolution of the medal you all wear. As you can read in the history of the Purple Heart, George Washington won an award that would honor and recognize military merit and bravery, especially of the enlisted soldier in combat. Only 3 awards were given during the Revolutionary War, and this award was discontinued until 1932, when it was reinstituted by the then Chief of Staff of the Army, General Douglas MacArthur, who was also the first recipient of the new Purple Heart Medal. General MacArthur's intent was to award the Purple Heart for meritorious service, including, but not exclusively for, wounds received in action against the enemy. When he instituted the award, he did not want to award it posthumously because he wanted the award to be an inspiration to the living. At this time, when he reinstituted it, it was only an Army award. And I'd like to remind you that the Air Force was part of the Army then. The Army Purple Heart for Merit was awarded 270 times in the early years of World War II. And it didn't cease until 1942 when the Legion of Merit was instituted to take its place. As an example, Brigadier General Frank Merrill was awarded the Purple Heart for Merit when he formed and trained Merrill's Marauders. The Army reversed this decision in 1942 and decided that the medal would be exclusively awarded for combat wounds. An executive order signed by President Roosevelt in 1942 expanded the award of the Purple Heart to the Navy, the Marine Corps, and the Coast Guard, and it also provided for posthumous awards to be given to the next of kin. Additionally, it stated that civilians working in close proximity to the armed forces were also to be given the Purple Heart were they wounded by enemy fire. In 1962, President Kennedy extended the award to advisors serving in Southeast Asia. Because during that time we were not technically or legally at war, language was added to the Purple Heart citation that it be given to those wounded by a hostile foreign force. President Ronald Reagan in 1984 expanded the criteria to include those wounded in terrorist attacks. And this was as a result of an attack on our soldiers in Beirut, Lebanon by a terrorist bomber. Awards for civilians were discontinued in 1997. Today, as you know, the Purple Heart is awarded when a member of the Armed Forces of the United States is wounded by an instrument of war at the hands of the enemy. It is awarded posthumously to the next of kin in the name of those who are killed in action or die of wounds as a result of combat action. For our military, the Purple Heart signifies that the grateful nation recognizes the great sacrifice of those wounded in combat. Not since World War II have our armed forces fought on 2 fronts and been so heavily engaged in operations around the world. Our nation has been involved in 2 wars combating global terrorism for almost an entire decade. We've just successfully and honorably completed a difficult campaign in Iraq. And though we've met our goals and objectives in Iraq, we're still conducting combat operations in Afghanistan. Today, we have 186,000 soldiers in 150 different countries. Our service members are serving throughout the world, fighting those who would do harm to our nation, preserving freedom, conducting humanitarian and disaster relief operations, and supporting friendly governments, stabilizing democracy, countering the illicit trafficking of drugs, weapons, and people, and protecting citizens. We face a complex and dynamic strategic environment that is marked by uncertainty, transnational threats that don't recognize borders, and international terrorists that are waiting to strike anywhere, anytime. But I will tell you that we face today a threat, but we have the most intelligent, battle-tested, professional, and proficient military we've ever had. All of our veterans should be proud of what they've accomplished. World War II veterans and Korean veterans were part of and known as the greatest generation. Members of that great generation earned more than 1.2 million Purple Hearts in World War II and Korea. Veterans of the Vietnam War earned more than 200,000 Purple Hearts. Today, our nation, rightfully so, recognizes these great Vietnam veteran patriots for their tremendous sacrifice and courage. I'll tell you personally that today's generation is showing its strength as well. Many of the men and women have served not 1 or 2 or 3 tours of duty, but have 5, 6 or more tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. Many of these same young people signed up after September 11th, knowing full well that their service would put them in harm's way. When I think of the current generation that is now serving, I think about soldiers like Sergeant First Class Christopher DeMange, who enlisted shortly before September 11th, 2001, and was killed in a terrorist bomb blast in Afghanistan in 2011. Sergeant DeMange was a 29-year-old Army Ranger from California. He was on his 14th combat tour. He'd served 4 in Iraq and 10 in Afghanistan. Sergeant First Class DeMange leaves behind a wife, 2 daughters, and a very grateful nation. I've seen firsthand the incredible acts of bravery by our young men and women of today's generation who volunteered to serve their country during this time of war. These young people are truly brave, as evidenced by 14,000 awards for valor given to date. Among these are 6 Medals of Honor, 23 Distinguished Service Crosses, and over 600 Silver Stars in the United States Army alone. So far, 45,000 veterans of Afghanistan and Iraq have been awarded the Purple Heart. They represent one of the main reasons President George Washington created the Purple Heart, to honor soldiers who, doing their duty, receive injuries as a result of enemy action. As I mentioned earlier, our country has been at war for 10 years, and I believe will remain in a state of persistent conflict for the foreseeable future. As we move forward in this era of conflict and limited resources, our Chief of Staff of the Army, General Raymond Odierno, has outlined our Army's future strategy and what he calls America's force of decisive action. General Odierno's force of decisive action is based on 3 main principles: to prevent conflict, to shape the environment, and to win our nation's wars. Prevent, shape, and win. My command, Army South, here in San Antonio, supports this current strategy. Our area of responsibility encompasses 31 countries and 10 territories. Army South is strongly engaged, and we have forces working with our partner armies in countries such as Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Honduras, El Salvador, and the Dominican Republic. In these countries and many others, we conduct medical exercises and engineer support operations, humanitarian and disaster relief training, as well as work with our partner nations to deal with the full range of contingency possibilities. Army South's exercise and operations with our partner nations in South America, Central America, and the Caribbean are already following the Chief of Staff's principles. We're prepared to rapidly dominate any operational environment, and we are able to conduct a full range of missions to include deterring and defeating transnational crime and terrorism, rapidly providing humanitarian assistance, as we did in Haiti just two short years ago, and engaging with our allies, building a partner nation capacity to counter the flow of drugs into this nation. We also support civil authorities at home and abroad. Here at Fort Sam Houston and in San Antonio, I think that the principles of prevent, shape, and win can be seen in your organization. Your organization was founded on the ideals of service, friendship, and assisting others. You work with and prevent veterans and wounded warriors and their families from falling through the cracks. You shape the environment through your charitable actions and education initiatives with wounded warriors, and your organization is decisively winning by helping veterans and their families every day. I thank you all for supporting our country, our veterans and their families. I thank you for the numerous charity events that you conduct each year, and I want to especially highlight that your efforts to maintain the connection between the veterans and today's Purple Heart recipients and our armed forces is beyond compare. Sergeants Elijah Churchill, William Brown, and Daniel Beazle. These are the names of the first Purple Heart recipients. I wish that we in this room tonight could see the name of the last Purple Heart recipient.
Amen.
Thank you all for your service to our nation, to the sacrifice you've made, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you tonight. God bless you all.